Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. When you're struggling with anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem, just keeping your emotions in check seems like a full-time job. Yet what may hold you back in life, even more, are your survival patterns. Have you ever wondered why you make yourself invisible, procrastinate, or please others to get their approval? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Dr. Friedemann Schaub, explores how to break free from the 6 most common subconscious survival patterns and make authenticity and confidence your everyday way of being. Dr. Schaub is a physician, researcher, personal development coach, and author of the award-winning book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution. He's the host of the Empowerment Solutions podcast. His website is drfriedemann.com, and he joins me this week to share his latest book, The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Dr. Friedemann Schaub. Welcome, Dr. Friedemann.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your message, which I believe is very important for everyone listening and for our world as it is. So please share with us your early path and how it led to your calling as a physician and a healer.
Well, my early path was basically fraught with anxiety, so that's why I am passionate about that subject and helping people to overcome anxiety. And the anxiety was, like many children, coming from different angles. One were my parents, who were constantly fighting, and also really anxiety-ridden. They were both always projecting the worst into the future. And when you're a child, you just pick it up and you feel like, okay, they need to know. So of course we're going to have World War III coming up, or, somehow we're going to end up in destitute because we run out of money, or whatever those things were. And the other reason for me to be anxious was that I have been given a job to be the peacemaker for my parents. And that job was given basically during conception, I guess, because I was a second child and my parents had a pretty tumultuous marriage, and they thought, well, this second child, that's going to fix it. And so they gave me also the name Friedemann, which means man of peace. Which is, of course, directly put into your crib. That's what you're here for. And since my parents didn't necessarily get the memo of getting along, I was for at least 18, 19 years until I left home, pretty much busy to try to mediate, try to make them understand each other, prevent divorce from happening. So that was pretty stressful. And the third anxiety trigger was certainly this idea that I'm not unconditionally lovable, because as soon as I had not the greatest grades, I was at the beginning of my scholastic time a little bit more happy-go-lucky, or just didn't care. I got in trouble. I mean, a D was the end of the world. And so I realized then that, okay, you have to perform, you have to please, and you have to peacemake, and you have to watch out. And so anxiety was just a constant companion.
Now, your original career, you started out as a physician and molecular biologist. How did that switch to helping people overcome anxiety and powerlessness?
Well, it was in stages. Getting into medicine was pretty much a given. As a good boy of 2 doctors, there was no other possibility than you have to become a doctor too and go into those footsteps, even though actually I wanted to become an actor. So that was not happening. And, but, being a doctor is a little acting too, I have to say. It is definitely not always, that the truth that you tell your patients, unfortunately. But I was over it, after being in cardiology for 6 or 7 years. I just felt like, you know what, this is not my thing. I need to take a break, because we were going through tremendous amounts of patients, but there was no time to talk with them, to understand what's going on, to get a little bit deeper into their health issues. And so lo and behold, they came back 6 months later, getting new prescriptions, getting new interventions. But I felt we were scratching the surface. So I didn't like that. I didn't like the machinery. And so I took 2 years off to go into research, which was required anyhow. So when I was in research, kind of my eyes opened up and I realized, wow, this is actually what the body is all about. There's so much wisdom. There is so much potential. Why are we not using this potential? What's going on here? And so then I continued in research, because I wanted to delve in deeper, and got a PhD in molecular biology, because I really wanted to understand more that what is really, let's say our true power to grow, adapt, and heal. And that then made me go into that overriding idea of, so if we have trillions of cells, and all of them are kind of working together, and all of them know their place, and there's a lot that they do on an ongoing basis to keep us healthy, what is the consciousness that is actually governing this? And that's when I got interested in the subconscious mind, and the subconscious just being a part of the mind that is, for many, kind of either something scary or something they ignore. But at the end, it is really the seat of so much of our potential, including the source of anxiety, that when I delved into it, I could then finally close the cycle of anxiety by understanding my own anxiety from the perspective of the subconscious. That made me then also really, excited. It's almost like I found my purpose, my passion. Now I know what I'm here to do. Yes, I did some detours in medicine and research, but what I really want to do is helping people to heal their anxiety at the root level without medication. And
so
that's
at the
why I'm
risk
here.
of sharing a pun, your heart was not in cardiology. Is that correct?
No, it was not in cardiology. I mean, I think I'm not against Western medicine. I love what I learned, and it was certainly so helpful for many. But again, the way right now allopathic medicine is going, it's just too mechanical, utilitarian, and too little power and responsibility is given to the patient. It's like, we doctors, we're going to fix you, and you pretty much can't really do anything about that. And that's I think a very sad state of affairs when it comes to healing.
We'll be discussing your new book, The Empowerment Solution, but please share with our listeners about your best-selling last book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution.
Well, there I really shared the path that I took, and then that I also took my clients on to overcome anxiety and fear. And what I describe in the Fear and Anxiety Solution is a step-by-step process to first get introduced to that subconscious that we all have, to understand that anxiety and fear are not to be feared, but they are ultimately deep-seated mechanisms, protective mechanisms of the subconscious to make sure that we stay alive and don't get harmed. And that those mechanisms are often based on early traumas and early programmings and beliefs. And what I describe in the book is how to heal the emotional baggage and how to overcome those inner fragmentations that come often from those early experiences, and then how to step into a new belief system, a new way of seeing the world. See, I saw myself as not good enough. I saw myself as someone who always had to prove himself that he is worthy. And so the bars got just pushed higher and higher. It was exhausting. And when I changed this belief system and really chose to believe that I am enough and that I can appreciate myself and that I can love myself, that pressure was off. That didn't stop me. but it wasn't coming from this, I have to, but it came from, I want to do those things I did afterwards. It's a very different energy.
It's a choice.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where
not
the
a
difference
need.
lies, the choice. Absolutely. And your latest book is entitled The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. What inspired that new book?
Well, I guess it was really, multiple things, but mainly my clients. I started working on this book 15 years into my practice, helping people to overcome their inner obstacles and working with the subconscious, etc. And I learned so much from them by seeing how, we always think we are very individual, and we are definitely unique, but we also repeat ourselves. We have these patterns that repeat themselves over and over again, and we are stumbling into these traps over and over again. And I noticed that even when people overcome their anxiety, and even when they're feeling, yes, now I have a new belief system, a new identity, if they did, though, act in the same old ways with the same patterns they had before, lo and behold, the anxiety could come back. So it dawned on me, it's not just really what we think and feel, but it's really important how we show up and how we act that makes us ultimately, the goal is to be this empowered leader of your life. And you cannot become an empowered leader of your life if you are still acting as if you are not good enough, or still acting as if you have to be scared, or any of those patterns that I described there. So looking at our behavior and learning how to change those behaviors, and not just stopping them, but transforming them. That was the goal of this book.
Now, many of us have heard the term the subconscious mind. What is the subconscious mind in your experience and definition and research, and how does it affect what we do?
Well, I think the subconscious mind is my best friend. I thought first it was my tormentor, but it turns out it's really just an enormous inner ally and resource to have. It's this deeper part of the mind that is underneath the conscious awareness. So how do we know we have a subconscious? Well, when you look at your thoughts, the thoughts that are bubbling up, the thoughts that you don't really want to have. Let's say, for example, you're on your second date and all of a sudden there's this little thought coming up. Well, what if she's not laughing about your jokes as much? Or what if he's, not really into you anymore, or whatever those thoughts are. These are not thoughts that you want to have because you want to feel confident and good about yourself, but they're still coming up. And that is from a deeper place, from a subconscious place. And the subconscious doesn't only annoy you with thoughts, of course, but it does a lot of things. It is the root of our emotions. It's the root of our physiological functions. When you think about how complex it is to raise an arm, a simple raising an arm. There are so many muscles that contract it and extend it. We're not doing this consciously, just as much as we're not consciously breathing or letting our heart beat. That's all subconsciously regulated. And then there's also these automatic patterns. When you think about how amazing it is that you can eat with a fork and knife and watch TV at the same time and don't stab your eyes. That's pretty amazing. There is something watching out for you, just like driving with your car and thinking about work and not having an accident because you don't really pay attention consciously. So the conscious mind is all about logic and planning and practical and all those things that we are aware. And the subconscious is in the background, taking care of the rest and taking care actually of 70 to 80% of our daily activities. Now, the problem with the subconscious is that it is early on programmed. So when you look, at your, as I said before, belief system, imprints, the way you look at the world and the way you feel about yourself, all those things happen early in life. And it's the reason why, because the subconscious is already pretty active and aware, while the conscious mind is still in its infant shoes, trying to, get it together and develop itself. So the subconscious has to look out for us. And it just continues to believe it has to look out for us, especially when we were not really feeling that safe or secure, or it wasn't really, so orderly at home. It was more chaotic. So the subconscious is ultimately like a super nanny. And when we become adults, that super nanny is still active and doing exactly the same thing. Watch out, this is dangerous. No, this is not okay. You can't do this. Just as it did when we were little to keep us safe. So it needs a new owner's manual. The subconscious needs the conscious mind to update itself. And that is what most people don't understand, that their subconscious is not constantly evolving. It's kind of stuck, and it needs us to help to get unstuck.
In the empowerment solution, you say that many live in survival mode. What does it mean to live in survival mode?
Well, survival mode is exactly that stuck subconscious mind setting that says it's more important to keep you safe and protect yourself than to thrive or go, God forbid, for something passionately or purposeful. Keep your head down, make sure you're not getting rejected, make sure that you're not getting criticized or abandoned, whatever those fears are. And the survival modes are the ones I described. There are more, but the 6 very common ones you could categorize in avoidance mode and pleasing mode. And the avoidance mode is basically just avoiding to get somehow hurt. And so there is the avoidance mode of the victim who is recounting over and over again how bad everything has been and what traumas they went through. And victims are often just also looking for things to repeat themselves and expecting this to happen. So they're stuck in that mode. And then there is the invisibility mode, which is a mode of that person who doesn't want to really be seen or heard and be somehow potentially criticized. So they keep themselves very small and very protected and unnoticeable. And then there is the mode of the procrastinator, the one that basically wants to avoid failure and wants to avoid the risk of doing something that potentially will not work out, or again, gets only judged in the end. So there are these avoidance modes, and that doesn't mean that your whole life is driven by these modes, but all of us have parts of these avoidance modes in our daily repertoire. We all do procrastinate, maybe because of different things. We all become invisible at different times. We all have this perpetrator of the past that we are still somehow using as a reference sheet. And so those avoidance modes, and then there is a pleasing mode, I can talk about this too. Those modes just keep us somewhat in a defense, in a self-defense survival consciousness. And that is then going back into saying, well, I'm only safe if I avoid these people, or the other mode is the pleasing. I'm only safe if I please these people and get their approval. And what happens is, since we're focusing so much on the outside to feel safe, that we naturally become again anxious when we cannot control the outside, which we can't. The only thing we can control is ourselves. But so you're relying on getting positive feedback, or relying on people not to judge you. But since you cannot really bank on it, that it's never happening, this anxiety and being on the watch for, something bad happening just resurfaces, and it goes into this vicious cycle of powerlessness.
And we're going to discuss some of these survival patterns in more depth, but why do you think that so many people end up living in survival mode?
Well, I think it is a sign of the times too, because I do feel we're living in a time where our environment and, not only internet and social media, but also how just this pressure on performing and having to somehow measure up of on expectations, and our own expectations that have been also certainly been imprinted by the outside, they become too much for us. I don't believe that we have really caught up with what we have been, as a society or with technology been evolving into. And so we are kind of operating with a mind and a whole system that feels constantly overwhelmed. And if I ask my clients, can you just describe to me what word would best, name your constant state of being? I would say 75 to 80% say overwhelm. And when you're in overwhelm, you're not thinking about, okay, how can I just, nourish myself and relax and learn and grow? All you think about is how can I make it through this to-do list, or through this really busy time, or through this challenge. And it never ends. It never ends. And so we are living in survival mode, and medically or physiologically, you would say, well, that's the reason why 70% of doctor visits are stress related. That's the number one disease and number one killer. And why do we have so much stress? Well, because we are only thinking about not getting hurt, or not, failing, or not getting somehow behind. And we're not really asking ourselves, what do I want? What's really important to me? Who am I in the first place? And given that all lives have an expiration date, how can I get the most out of it? Those questions we don't even have time to consider. And so that is, I think, where the subconscious especially says, oh my God, this is like, again, a really difficult, challenging way to exist. So I have to make sure that this person is safe. And that is, where the subconscious doesn't look for joy and purpose. The subconscious only looks for how to survive another day.
Do you think that the explosion of social media over the last 25 years or so has exacerbated this?
100%. I mean, I think in, 20, 30 years, people will say that social media is as bad as the invention of cigarettes, and maybe even worse. I mean, really, social media, as much as we think it does good things and connects us and blah, 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 yes, but there is so much that it does to us. There is so much that people suffer from. Young people get depressed and anxious because they constantly compare themselves to those that they can never reach. Other people feel like they can, only measure up by doing crazy challenges of, eating spoonfuls of cinnamon and stuff like that, then often leads, unfortunately, to getting hurt or killed. And then there is this never being in the present moment. I had some nephews, a nephew and his girlfriend, actually. They came to a visit and they were 16. It's nice, a girl and a boy going to a visit. I'm here in southern France. You think they would go into the lavender fields and just smell whatever. But no, they have been sitting there on that canopy, on that couch for hours, opposite of each other, scrolling through their phones, not saying one single word. And I couldn't believe it. It's like, how is this a way to relate? And this is what so many people, not only teenagers, so many people are doing. They're not looking into their external environment, into what's in front of them. They're only looking at this little device that somehow shows them some reality that is not even that great. But the distraction and that wanting to have this next hit of whatever it is, dopamine, or the gratification of finding something that makes you smile or interesting or feel something, that addiction is so strong that the direct environment, the life as it is now, becomes uninteresting. And if we don't find any interest in our three-dimensional reality, we are pretty much lost. And I think that's where we have to look back and say, okay, how can we stop this? Not only for us, but also for the next generations to come.
My guest is Dr. Friedemann Schaub. His new book, The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. Please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and this wonderful work that you do.
Well, you can find my books anywhere, Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and bookstores. But also you can go directly to my website, drfriedemann.com. It's actually Dr. Dr. and then Friedemann in a German way. So there is an E after the D, 2 N's.com. And there definitely the books listed and also other things that I have been doing and offering.
And you also have a program coming up.
Yes, it's from anxiety to empowerment program. And it's basically a 6-session program, a video program that allows you from the comfort of your own home to go through the steps that connect you to your subconscious to help you find why you have been anxious, why you have been struggling with insecurity, and not only address those root causes, but really get all the tools and all the processes to create this new owner's manual and come out in a way that you really look back at your anxiety, just like I did, and say, wow, thank you, anxiety, because you made me look at myself. Without you, I would have never gone into the journey to try to discover who I really am. That's the goal of this program. And that's what so far my clients have been telling me. That's what happens when we really don't condemn or run away from our anxiety, but when we use it as a catalyst for our own evolution.
And we'll be back with more of Dr. Friedemann and the Empowerment Solution after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Friedemann Schaub. His book is called The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. We started talking about these patterns that in the first segment. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the avoider pattern. What is the avoider pattern?
Well, the avoider pattern is definitely the pattern in general that says the best way for us is to see other people as potential danger and their reactions to us as something that we have to control or ideally avoid. And so the pattern itself, is divided into 3, as I mentioned. So there is the victim, the invisibility, and the procrastination pattern. And the interesting thing about the avoider pattern, I know of many people that would say, well, I'm not an avoider. I'm certainly not an invisibility person. What do you talk about? I'm so social. I'm so outgoing. So that pattern doesn't really work for me. But then when you go a little bit deeper and you ask yourself, so yes, you like to be seen in a certain way. You like to show up, all together in confidence and jovial. But do you show really what's underneath the surface? Do you really show your vulnerability? Do you really share when you're anxious or sad or struggle with self-confidence? No, you don't. So you are also then invisible to other people because you're too scared of showing that other side of you. And that's what I see often with people, that they don't live 100% as a recluse, as an avoider, as an invisibility person, but they don't dare to show their whole authentic self. It's a very conditional way of showing up. And so I think we have to always, look at ourselves and say, how much of who we are in the world is really us, and how much are we conditioned just to perform and not really show up as that true and real self? Do we even know what that means? And the way that shows up in our lives when we live in this pattern is that we often feel dissatisfied. Many people that are in the avoider pattern realize that there is some void inside of them, a void. And that void inside of them is ultimately that void that they try to fill with whatever successes or purchases. But the void comes from that inner self that hasn't been fully expressed. For me, it was that inner happy-go-lucky self that I had to suppress because I was only acceptable if I had good grades and it was serious and did everything that I was told to do. So that dreamer, that creative self, that self that was looking at the world and saw all the beauty and magic, I had to unearth this self in my late 30s. And when I did, that void that I had felt, and that couldn't be filled with anything, no relationship, no success, no doctorate could really fill that void. Once I unearthed that aspect of myself, all of a sudden I felt whole. And that's, really something that brings so much peace to a person.
And the pleaser, something I can identify with.
Yes, a lot of people do. And, pleasers often also are kind of stubborn because they feel like, well, what's wrong with pleasing? Isn't that like what we're supposed to do? And the difference between doing good and being of service versus being in the pleaser survival pattern is that the pleaser survival pattern wants something in return. See, if you only do good because this is what you really feel like you're meant to do, you don't keep score. You don't want a little pat on the back. You don't care if people say thank you or if you get approval or an invitation or whatever it is. You just do it because that's what you do. But most people that are in the pleaser pattern do it because it's easier for them to take care of others than of themselves. It's much more gratifying for them to get from others some kind of a compliment or a sense of importance. Because when they are by themselves, they often are struggling with themselves. They often avoid themselves because they do feel like they're not good enough or they don't really have any kind of value outside of being the pleaser. And there are three pleaser patterns I talk about. One is the chameleon pleaser. So that's the one that shifts easily from one persona to the next, depending on who they are around. Often these are people that are very, very sensitive and aware. And when they're around the parents, they are certain ways. When they're around the colleagues, they're a certain way. And they don't really know who they are because they are like a chameleon, really blending in. For them, it's not so much about doing or being of service. For them, it's much more about kind of the fitting in aspect. And I find that's especially in social media world, very, very common that we want to fit in. We don't even ask, do we really like this activity? Is that really what we believe in? Is that really the clothes that fits me? No, I'm doing all of this because I want to fit in. So that's that pleaser, chameleon. And then there is the helper. That's certainly the classic caretaker. The one just always overgives and usually underappreciates themselves. And then there is the lover. Now, the lover is an interesting one because that is the one that really looks not to necessarily please everyone, but just one person. It's the one person that, that's the person gets really lost in a relationship that cannot live without some kind of a romantic connection. And you could argue that pattern may be rather rare. But when you are in that lover pattern, you definitely struggle and suffer because your whole world depends on that person that you chose to be the one. And unfortunately, often it's the one that hurts you the most. And that's where those codependencies come from. But that's definitely a pattern I wanted to include because it's so devastating when you get lost in it.
I can speak to the pleaser aspect of the helper. Something that was wired in me as a young child. I had a very difficult, tenuous relationship with my father. I was the firstborn, and he was 20 years older than my mother when they got married, and I don't think he was really ready for children. But I never felt loved by him. And then when I was 8 years old, he got sick. And I became part of his caretaking team with my mother. And for the first time, I felt that I was loved by him. And it wired in my young mind that if you care for others, you will be loved. And that set up that helper pattern within me, something that caused me to neglect many things about myself and my own health throughout my life until my late 40s. And when I came to the decision that I had to stop taking care of everyone else and start taking care of myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be around much longer. And it actually engendered a poem that I wrote called The Healing Power of No. May I share that with you?
Oh, yes, please.
A time comes for choosing rather than losing the essence that makes us so. And in the bestowing, there's power in knowing the freedom that comes with no. When said with compassion, not angry in fashion, and letting the self-love flow, there's a sense of renewing and deep soul imbuing the awareness that comes with no. So with gentle voice and the power of choice and the courage to make it so, I'm still here, my friends. There's no means in this end, just the healing that comes with no.
Wow, that is perfect summary for this chapter. You could have written it. I mean, that is just, I used, I don't know, 10,000 words or 20,000 words, and you just put in such a beautiful, short, and really exquisite form. Thank you.
Thank you. And it changed
amazing.
my life so dramatically and really brought me to a point of self-appreciation and self-care, which is the most important thing. I was really neglecting my self-care. And saying yes when appropriate, but also saying no when appropriate. And that was the big challenge for me.
Absolutely. And that's what also I describe in the helper pattern. I mean, two things. One is that the helper or the pleaser has all these excuses on why, it's not okay to take care of yourself. Like, self-care is selfish, or when someone is struggling, you have to alleviate their pain, or isn't it better to be empathetic than just, taking care of yourself? So there are all these things that are addressed because they are not true. They are just what we tell ourselves. And then there are these boundaries. And it's interesting you say no, which is actually one of the boundaries I describe, which is called no is a full sentence. And that is certainly the external boundary of putting the foot down and saying, sorry, can't. It's beyond me, or I need to take care of myself, or I don't have the energy, or this is not what I can do for you. And they're certainly a little bit more elegant of ways than just no, but it's important, this no that you say to the outside world. However, that's not the most important no. The most important no is to yourself, to this impulse, to this habit, to jump in as soon as someone says, I need something, to raise the hand right away when someone is asking for volunteers. That no to yourself and saying, no, you don't have to get stuck in other people's challenges or sufferings. No, you are not responsible to fix them. No, you are worthy even if you say, I can't, and take care of yourself. Because as a pleaser myself, I found my inner boundaries were the ones that got broken much easier than the outer boundaries. I could say no, and then I could sit with guilt and shame at home and felt bad that I did say no. So we have to have that boundary and that compassion, like you wrote in your poem, with that boundary for ourselves as well.
Absolutely. So how do these patterns make us give away our power and lead to anxiety?
Well, when you are in a pattern, you basically say, well, the person I please, or the person I want love from, or the person I want to avoid to get mad at me or criticize me, you give the power to all of them. You're basically telling you my well-being and my safety and my worthiness is dependent on others, either their presence or their absence. And you don't really look at your own self as the source of security and worthiness. And so giving our power away is kind of misleading, because it's not really that we are giving our power away. It's not something like, money that you put into other people's hands, but you believe that you don't have the power to be enough, to feel safe from within, to have the sense of self-worth that just comes from your existence or from how you know yourself. So the goal of this work is really helping people to see how they can turn the focus away from looking at the outside world as that what makes them feel better, to looking inside. And you mentioned one word in your poem, which was essence. And I think that's so important for us to realize that our essence, who we are, is ultimately unlimited. We have so much potential, so much power, so much wisdom. There are so many gifts that we carry. But if we don't really look for them, and we only look for either become the smaller version of ourselves or look for what other people want us to be accepted, naturally, we really let those this potential and those gifts become dormant. And then we feel more anxious because we feel so dependent and we feel so exposed and we feel so small, just like we did when we were children. I mean, you mentioned it. It's like when you have in your childhood an experience that's deeply moving and it's ingrained in your mind that I am only lovable if I take care of others. Well, that is certainly a pattern that doesn't make you look for any kind of self-worth, because you have chosen only this equation is give something and maybe you get a little bit something back. And that creates a lot of fear, because what if it doesn't come back? And what if I have nothing to give? Or what if what I give is not enough in the eyes of others? That is where a lot of people feel anxiety in relationships. And that's where a lot of people feel disconnected from themselves. And I really invite listeners to do a little experiment and just look at the patterns of avoidance and pleasing and ask themselves, how do I feel when I sit by myself 10 minutes, 15 minutes without any distractions, without anything? There's not even any kind of meditation practice to do, just sitting with yourself. Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel you connect to yourself just like you would to a friend? Or do you feel like you're with a stranger who you want to just avoid as soon as possible?
And the key word here is connection, to reconnect with ourselves.
Right. Absolutely.
And in the process of reconnection, what happens?
When we reconnect with ourselves, it's like coming home. And that is certainly something that I find is one of the most beautiful experiences we can have. Because I, for once, again, I have to talk about myself because that's definitely something I study very intensely. When I came to Seattle and started the molecular biology program, I was so identified as a doctor that when I had taken the coat off and the stethoscope hung on the wall, I didn't know who I was. I had no connection to myself. And so because I didn't know anybody in Seattle at that time, I came from Germany, I really was so insecure just entering into a restaurant because I felt everyone is looking at me and everyone knows that I'm actually without friends here, and all these, self-judgment and self-criticism just was yelling in my ears. And that discomfort made me constantly not want to be around myself, or wanted me just to distract myself or self-medicate and all the good things we were doing. So coming home to myself was more comfortable than actually I ever had felt in my childhood home, because it was a feeling of exhale. Finally, I know who I am. I know that I can rely on myself. I know that who I am is who I'm supposed to be. And there's always room to grow and explore, but there is a comfort and that feeling of, I know that I can lean on myself. I can rely on myself. And that is something we are all capable of. And when you struggle with anxiety, when you struggle with these survival patterns, They are simply messages that tell you, okay, it's time to go and renew yourself, reconnect to yourself, realign yourself with your essence. These strong feelings are not telling you the truth about something is wrong with you or something is wrong with the outside world. They're usually telling yourself that you're just not on the right track, that you're not focusing on that what you need to focus on, which is really you and what you're here for. Because I'm a firm believer we have a purpose. It doesn't have to be something always, book writing or some earth-shattering something. It's just something that fills us up, something that we are here to share, something that makes us feel we are really in that sweet spot of knowing that we are here for a reason. And it can have all different shapes and forms. And when we feel that and when we feel connected to that, then every day feels meaningful.
My guest is Dr. Friedemann Schaub. His book is called The Empowerment Solution. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Friedemann Schaub. His book is called The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. Doctor, what does it mean to be the leader of our life?
Well, the leader of your life is the one that I just mentioned feels at home with himself, but also feels that nothing is happening to them. It is basically that choice to even respond and not react to whatever circumstances we are in. The choice to move forward in the direction that feels in alignment with their purpose and alignment with their essence. And that also that choice to take impeccable care of themselves and make sure that whatever they do comes from a place of love for themselves, but also love for life and love for others. And so it's an ideal to become that leader of our life that we all can, if we choose to, go into. But to get there, I felt it was important to have certain keys that are unlocking certain gifts and strengths inside of us. And those are the 6 keys I mentioned in the book.
And how can we learn to love ourselves more?
Well, that's a beautiful question, because I also felt like, isn't it interesting that we all talk about self-love and how it's important and you cannot really love anyone if you cannot love yourself. But it's not necessarily something that anyone, talks about, or it's not what you learn in school. And certainly you don't learn it from your parents. When I was told, well, you shouldn't feel good about yourself because that's arrogant and no one likes arrogance. That's what my parents like to do. to say, then, any kind of idea of self-love was just burst like a little bubble. I mean, I couldn't feel love for myself because apparently that was not acceptable by others. So it took me a while to understand that self-love is basically something that we can do based on what we know how we love others. And I knew that I loved others. I knew that I had been, expressing love and care for people, for animals. And so the way I describe self-love is literally understanding that we also have these needs that our loved ones have. And so it's about the connection to your physical body and just really listening to the message of your physical body and be aware of. And then there is the emotional body, paying attention to that and also really responding to it in the same way. And then understanding that we also have these love languages, the 4 or 5 love languages that are famously described as, these are the keys to know that you're loved and also know that you can show someone you love them. And we just have to be aware of that we can use those love languages as well. So how we talk to ourselves, how we spend quality time, how we can spoil ourselves once in a while, how we can, also give ourselves physical touch. All those things lead to a much more warm and comfortable relationship to ourselves. But if we have all this baggage beforehand, this is why the self-love chapter is the last one in the book, or almost the last one in the book. If we have all these other challenges that we have to first deal with, whether it's not knowing our essence, or whether it's not really being able to rely on our word, or whether it's still that we have not recaptured our innocence, which is something I describe in the invisibility chapter. All of those things I find are necessary for us to come to a place where we can say, okay, now I know myself enough. It's like we're dating ourselves, and now I can also fall in love with myself.
You talk about this as updating our owner's manual. What do you mean by that?
Well, the owner's manual basically is the survival pattern, the idea that whatever happens is still somehow looked at through the eyes of a younger version of ourselves. So, let's say your example is the example of helping others, caring for others equals love. That's the old owner's manual. And so there is not necessarily room to receive because you have to give. And there is certainly no room to love yourself because it comes from others. And so that's the old owner's manual. And we live often in this old owner's manual, not in all aspects. A classic example is someone who has been really successful in their career and feels thriving and feels outgoing. But as soon as they go in their private lives, and let's say they go to a gathering or a party, they feel exactly like they have been when they were 12 years old, standing in the corner, not daring to talk to anyone, completely shy and insecure, being the wallflower, because that's the old survival pattern. Strangers, watch out. In that career, they're not necessarily bound by this survival pattern because the career is something new. It's something that came after the original description of survival and keeping it safe and so on. So what we need to realize is, where do we act still in ways that limit ourselves, that are almost like we're looking through the eyes of a child and not really our adult self. We can become defensive. We can, when we are, for example, classic example is when you go home and you, after 48 hours, you feel you're reverting back to being like a child. You're either, pleasing mom, or you're agreeing with dad, or you become rebellious and you find yourself arguing just like you did when you're 16 years old. These are all signs that you haven't really updated your owner's manual. And the beauty about the new owner's manual, the way it's described in the book, is that you write it. It's not something your subconscious writes. It's your conscious mind writing it in alignment with your subconscious. It's telling your subconscious, we don't have to do this anymore. We don't have to hide out. We don't have to live in the past. We don't have to please others just to get approval. We can change this. We can turn this around. And this is where we have to communicate with the subconscious, which is described in the book, How to Do This. But when we do, literally the subconscious and the conscious mind are in sync. And the conscious mind is a leader and the subconscious is that supporter, but they both go into the same direction, which is creating a life of greater purpose and joy.
The wisdom of Dr. Friedemann Schaub, his new book, The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. Please share with our listeners one more time where they can get your books and find out more about you and your work.
Just go to my website, drfriedemann.com, or for all information, private sessions, my webinar or my video seminar that comes up next week, or this week actually, and also my YouTube channel and my books and recordings, all the things that are something I love to share with the world, you can find there. And the book is in itself, you can find on Amazon and all the bookstores that are out there.
Dr. Friedemann, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this wisdom and experience and these wonderful lessons that we all need to learn.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I really enjoyed our time together.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.